Okay, we're going to be looking at a few more examples now. Now we've done a few. And we're going to start the same way. This is the trinomial, right? 3 terms with no GCF. So we're going to take a look at the middle and last terms, and we're going to have to try to find two numbers that both multiply to the positive 8 and then add to the negative 9. So I forgot my blank there. Let me fix that. Okay. So we're multiplying towards positive 8. I don't really need the plus here, but it's always important to think about because you do need the minus sign, right? We need to find two numbers that multiply to 8, so we're going to start with 8. How do we multiply it to 8? Well, 1 times 8 or 2 times 4. Okay. Now we need to make it up to negative 9, right? We are actually adding to a positive 8, so I'm just going to imagine that plus there for a second. And we might see a little bit of a problem here. How are we going to get this negative 9 here when we add together and end up with a positive up here? Well, if everything was positive, they would add to a plus, right? They would also multiply to a positive. But what happens if you multiply two negatives? You also get a positive, and if you add two negatives, you'd get a negative. So that's going to be the key here, understanding that 1 and 8 add to 9, but if you want to make them add to negative 9, you're going to have to use a negative 1 and a negative 8. Okay? Now we always have to check that both blanks and sets of blanks work. Right? What is negative 1 times negative 8? Well, that's positive 8. Right? So we're good. We're good. Right? So that means we can take our x minus 1 and our x minus 8 and figure it out. Now, you can always check your answer by doing the full multiplying like we learned before. But sometimes you can also do like a quick check in your head. You could take a look at this, negative 1 times negative 8, and see that's positive 8. Okay? If you want to, you could also imagine the negative 1x and the negative 8x here, which gives you the negative 9x, and you could do a quick check like that. Okay? There are certain patterns that are predictable. Anytime this is a plus at the end, which means this is a plus, you have to have either two positives or two negatives. And then this sign is going to determine that. I don't necessarily like memorizing that as a rule, but it's certainly something you could if you find this part confusing. The key is if you're multiplying towards a positive, right, you need to add to the negative 9, and if you're multiplying to a negative, then you have to subtract to whatever that number is. Okay? Really, the best way to learn this is to just keep practicing and doing them over and over again. Okay? Math is part learning and understanding, and also part practice and repetition. Okay? So, we get to a problem like this. Same basic scenario. Trinomial, 3 terms, no greatest common factor to all 3 terms. So we go about setting up our blanks. We need two numbers that multiply to negative 16, and we have to make sure that those same two numbers are going to add to positive 6. Okay? Once you see you need to multiply to negative 16, you should have it in your head that you're subtracting. Right? So when we go to write out the factors of 16, 1 times 16, 2 times 8, there's no 3, but there's 4 times 4. Right? The key is we're going to be subtracting, right? Because if we're going to multiply a positive and a negative together, then we'll get the negative 16 we need. Right? But once we decide to add a positive and a negative together, they have a subtracted effect. So when we go through our list here of all the possible factors, right? 1 and 16, they don't subtract to 6. 2 and 8, yes, that does subtract to 6. So we could put the 2 and the 8 in, and it wouldn't matter if you put the 8 and the 2 in. The order doesn't matter, right? Because it's multiply and add. They're both commutative operations. We know that one of them is going to have to be negative and one of them is going to have to be positive. Since we want to end up with a positive 6, we should make the 8 positive and leave the 2 negative. Okay? Get all your signs figured out up here. Do a quick check that both of these work. Negative 2 times 8 is negative 16. Negative 2 plus 8 is 6. And then you can go fill in the answer. x minus 2, x plus 8. Okay. Again, you can always check. It's probably always worth doing this quick check here to make sure that you get that right sign. All right, negative 2 times positive 8 is negative 16. All right, that's an easy one to do that you can do in your head usually without actually writing everything out. But if this were on a quiz or a test and you finish early, it's probably a good idea to just multiply the whole thing out and make sure you got all the signs right. Sometimes when you go to check your work, you can actually catch the mistake if there was one. Okay. All right, let's do one more. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, same scenario, trinomial, no greatest common factor. So we need two numbers that are going to multiply to 10, and those same two numbers are going to have to add to negative 3. Okay, now it's a positive 10. You don't have to write the positive, but sometimes it's worth putting the plus there just to remind you that you're going to have to add to negative 3, not subtract. Right? Now we're going to go look at the factors of 10. Right? There's only two ways to multiply to 10, 1 times 10 or 2 times 5. Okay? Now this is going to be tempting, right? 1 plus 10 is not 11, is not negative 3. 2 plus 5 also is not negative 3, but 2 minus 5 would be negative 3. Okay? The key I said at the beginning here is that because this is a plus 10, we need to add to negative 3. Okay? Sometimes you'll see a tempting option. Okay, so let's say we did try to make the 2 and the 5 work. Okay, well, we would have to make the 5 negative and the 2 positive. And then if you come up here, you would have to make the 5 negative and the 2 positive, but then you wouldn't get the plus 10 anymore, you'd be getting a minus 10. And if you tried changing the 2 to a negative or the 5 to a positive, then you would not get the other one to work. So this is one of those tough cases where you might think it's going to work, but all the signs have to work out correctly. So that doesn't work. Well, what happened here? We tried everything that could work and nothing worked, right? Well, we've dealt with that before when any polynomial can't be factored, right? We have to say so. It can't be factored. Pen's not working great, but it's better than my finger, so let me clean that up just a little bit. Okay, the simplest way to say this is in simplest terms that everybody can understand. It can't be factored. The more formal and official way to say that is that it's prime. Okay, depending on the class you're in, your teacher might want you to use the word prime. I sometimes prefer that you use words that explain things rather than memorize a term. I would be okay with either of these answers. But we have to remember that sometimes trinomials won't be factorable. If you can't come up with a pair of numbers that both multiply to positive 10 and add to negative 3, then we'd have a problem. Right? Now, if this was in fact a minus 10, then everything would be different, right? And then we'd be able to get it to work, right? But it wasn't in this case. Okay? It's really important that you just keep practicing a bunch of these. Okay? It's not that hard to make up new ones if you run out of problems to try, because you could sit down and multiply a bunch of ones out and then come back later and try to rework them in a different order. But there's also going to be plenty of examples in homework, and you can search the internet looking for trinomials. As long as you find ones that have just an x squared with nothing but a 1 in front of them, you should be able to use this technique. Okay, we've got a little bit more in this section, but I think this is a good time to stop and practice doing the basic ones, and then I'll have a third video that'll explain some of the extra things we might have to do along the way.